Special Sunday edition. Today is May 1st. We're in 2022 now, folks. And JP Linstroth has been joining the show now for a number of years. I'm going to bring on a Linstroth report, is what he and I were calling these for a couple of years, a number of months. And so we'll just see what JP Linstroth is up to. Dial JP in right now. This is Ian Trottier for Discuss Your Truth, brought to you by My Pillow. As a matter of fact, folks, My Pillow. Use Trottier as your discount code.
Hello,
JP. Good afternoon to you, sir. How are you?
good. Ian, how are you? Good afternoon.
Good. I'm doing just great. Welcome back to the program, JP. And it sounds like you've got some interesting things going on. You've got a new book that you're writing.
Yes. Well, I have a book that came out in January. Politics and Racism Beyond Nations: A Multidisciplinary Approach to Crises. And I have another book coming out in November, which is really a book of short stories and poems.
Great. Okay, so more poetry, and you do really good work in poetry, and I think that gives you a real opportunity to encompass some of your philosophical skills, right? I mean, you've done some nice work that I've read in the realm of poetry.
Yes. So this forthcoming book is a book of short stories, 5 short stories and 10 poems, and some short stories that I'm pretty proud of. The last book that came out was a book of nonfiction, so that was tackled some big subjects.
Yep.
It brings together diverse fields from anthropology, biology, neurology, peace studies, political science, psychology, and sociology.
Yep.
And I think it demonstrates how the Othering Project is evident through national policies of immigration, through aspiring nationalisms, through genocidal inhumanity and subsequent effects of such othering, evident in racial trauma. And so basically I look at nationalism, terrorism, genocide, and racial trauma in the book. And through my fieldwork among the Basques, among the Guatemala Maya immigrants, and among the Brazilian Amerindians.
Wow. So this isn't just Brazil. This isn't a study of just Brazil. You've studied the Mayans in Guatemala.
Right. So the Mayans in Guatemala were immigrants in South Florida that I looked at.
Okay.
And basically, interviewed them for this is back a little while ago when we had the grant, which is 2005, but subsequently was published into an article which I wrote, Mayan Cognition, Memory and Trauma, 2009 it came out, and then from that article I borrowed from that research and put it into the book about their memories of genocide in Guatemala. And also I interviewed Buddhist monks for the end of the book, so I look at peace aspects in the book as well, like how Buddhism ties into peace and peace work and so on, stuff like that.
Yeah, so for people from Tibet.
Yes.
So peace studies has been a topic of at least one of the people that you've introduced me to in the past, and I think it's been a while since we've done a show, JP. I think one of the last shows we did was when this Black Lives Matter movement was a hot topic nationally, and we brought in a couple of different teachers local to South Florida to discuss racism in schools. I think that was one of the last shows we did. But politics and racism beyond nations A Multidisciplinary Approach to Crisis is J.P. Linstroth's one of his recent books here, available on Amazon right now. It's J.P. Linstroth. So, JP, let me ask you, you continue to write for CounterPunch, and Counterpunch. I'm not sure where they're based out of, but the title of your one of your recent articles, anyway, is "Why Russia Needs Brazil and Vice Versa." Uh, Talk a little bit about that, if you would, JP.
Sure. So they're based out of California, I think, CounterPunch, and so why Russia needs Brazil and vice versa. So basically, because of the sanctions from the West, um, and because of President Jair Bolsonaro's um, um, friendship, I guess you could say, or diplomatic friendship with Vladimir Putin,
Interesting.
because he met with Putin about a couple months ago, formally, and so Russia reached out to Brazil to help them for backing the International Monetary Fund and World Bank and the G20 group and so on. And so Brazil thought that, Russia thought that Brazil could help Russia in their with these international organizations behind the scenes, because basically behind the scenes, Russia's being expelled, maybe even from the decision-making process from the IMF, from the World Bank, and so on. And then the other aspect of this is that Brazil buys fertilizer from Russia, and on a massive scale. And so when I talk about the title of the article is "Why Russia Needs Brazil and Vice Versa," Brazil needs Russia for the fertilizer, which it's now suspended exporting fertilizer because of the war. It's potassium, and last year Russia sold to Brazil $3.5 billion in fertilizer. And so what Bolsonaro wants to do is now exploit the Amazon to get the fertilizer from there, and it's a big mess because he wants to pass these bills. They're called one's called Bill PL 191 T20. The other one is PL 490 2007, which would allow Brazil to mine the
Amazon
and indigenous reserves, basically. And there's no evidence from the Federal University of Minas Gerais that potassium exists in the indigenous reserves that exist elsewhere in Brazil. So the irony is that, of course, that the potassium is probably not in the indigenous reserves in the Amazon, but found elsewhere in the country, like in the south, like in places like Minas Gerais, probably.
JP, how does Paraguay relate to any of this? Do they?
Well, the Paraguay has its own part of indigenous population, right? And they have they're part of Mercosur. So
Okay.
Mercosur is the countries of Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, and Brazil, which is a economic cohesion like the European Union, but for the South America. So they're kind of their own kind of economic package, I guess you would say, or coalition.
Mm-hmm.
Coalition, and Paraguay would be interested in, as far as an economic partner of Brazil, and for Mercosur, Why do you ask about Paraguay?
Well, I'm just kind of scanning through your article, and I'm seeing this Paraguay and Uruguay, Argentina. I'm just kind of looking at some of the geoeconomic dynamics that might be at play here in regards to this relationship with Putin and the Brazilian president. But let me ask this. Let me come at this from a different angle here, JP, and let me get your personal understanding of. Let's kind of scale things back for a moment and just look at Putin aggressively moved in and invaded Ukraine, which I think it kind of certainly caught me off guard. It probably likely caught most of the international community off guard. But it is a reminder as to what a brute military force can look like. Now, seems that Ukraine is putting up, and try not to take sides here, but it seems like Ukraine is putting up a defense, but Russia is still inside. Is this more than natural resources going on here? Whereas I'm going to say that's likely oil. But am I wrong here? What is your understanding of why Putin made this very aggressive invasion of Ukraine? Are there ethics involved here? What's going on? What are the dynamics at play in your view?
So, in my view, the Putin doesn't regards Ukraine has always been part of Russia, and that it's not a separate country. And if the Ukrainians are really Russians in disguise, right? They're really not Ukrainians. They're really Russians.
Soviets, yeah.
So Putin has total misreading of the Ukrainians and the Ukrainian notion of independence, and Ukraine has been part of Russia for quite a long time, but they've also have had in the last 8 years and more their own independence movement since the breakup of the Soviet Union, and wanting their own movement out as far as natural resources and those issues are concerned. I mean, Ukraine is one of the breadbaskets of Europe, supplying much of the wheat.
Right.
But as far as Putin's motives for Ukraine, he wants Ukraine to be part of Russia as far as territorial irredentism is concerned. So it's sort of that that Ukraine should never have left Russia to become independent. It's just really part of Russia.
Why does he wait? Why does he make his move now? What is it about 2020 that why does he wait till now? Was Ukraine weak in his eyes right now? Is this why he moved in right now? Why did he make his move now?
So 2022, why did it? Well, Russia's been fighting a proxy war in the Donbass region for the last couple of years, and had annexed Crimea, which has been a traditional Russian port. But as far as why he's doing it now, I mean, he believed the West is usurping Russian power by using NATO to take over Eastern Europe, and which were traditionally Soviet countries. And by the way, and I should emphasize this too, Ian, is that I'm not an expert on Russo-Russian dynamic. I'm just not my area. But I would say that, like, there's political scientists like John Mearsheimer out there who blame the West, the United States, for overbuilding NATO at Russia's doorstep, and which has caused some political dynamics that have led to this. So his argument would be that
Threat.
it was the States and the West's fault that we overbuilt NATO up by including all these Eastern European countries, including the Baltic states like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, which are, were part of the Soviet Union prior to this, Poland, Romania, and that has caused this to happen.
So let's get. Yeah, go ahead. So we go with Bolsonaro here, and what does that look like again politically? It sounds like Putin and Bolsonaro's politics. Do they mesh well to that the two of them are now at the table talking about trade?
Well, what's really interesting about the Putin-Bolsonaro friendship or diplomatic relations is that all the BRICS countries, so all the BRICS countries are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, right? That's BRICS. Those are all emerging economies. And if you look at the UN resolution for suspending Russia from the Human Rights Council in the UN,
yeah,
those BRICS countries, all of them abstained from voting against Russia. Brazil, India, and South Africa abstained from voting against Russia, and China voted against UN resolution, right? So there's another dynamic going on here with those kind of emergent economies that they didn't punish Russia for the Ukrainian war. On the contrary, they abstained. And so there's a dynamic going on with that. And as far as Brazil and Russia's relations, I mean, I honestly, I think that Jair Bolsonaro was overplaying his hand by thinking that he's an international player on the scale of, I don't know, the U.S. or Great Britain or France even, or even China, who are also on the Security Council. And Brazil is just not there militarily or economically, right? The international player, but Bolsonaro, by visiting Russia a couple months ago, wanted to be seen as a international player that could be a mediator or transformative in foreign relations.
So Brazil in this case may need Russia more than Russia needs Brazil, but certainly the two of them could use each other since Ukraine is putting up a fight against Russia.
Right, Brazil needs Russia for fertilizer, and Russia needs Brazil for its backing of it on the IMF, World Bank, and the G20, those kind of international economic organizations.
Got it. Yep. JP, talk a little bit about this book that you've got that's coming out. Did you say November?
Yeah, so it's the title, and I don't know if the publisher's going to keep the title, but tentatively the title is Swimming in Blue Shadows. And there are 5 short stories. Have a short story on bullfighting, have a short story on hog hunting, have a short story on archaeology and beliefs, have another short story of a Mexican poor Indian, Nahuatl Indian in central Mexico, a flower seller, and have another story about Oxford in there, and then I have 10 poems that are in there. So that's that book, and in one, I don't know if I'm supposed to announce this or not, but I won the supplemental prize, which means that they're going to publish the book. Didn't win any money, but it won a supplemental prize, which means that they're going to publish it. So
that's fantastic. Congratulations, JP. What's the story about Oxford?
So the Oxford story is about a relationship that kind of goes wrong, and the end result of that. And so
Uh-huh.
it's called To Be Forgotten.
Something that
Uh,
you something that you experienced firsthand, perhaps, or not?
Correct. I mean, those.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's based on my own experiences. A lot of the short stories are based on my own experiences, and but um, the the dynamic play in the book is Swimming in Blue Shadows. The idea is that there's a sense of I guess death is looming throughout the theme throughout those short stories,
Interesting.
and you know, with the bullfighting and the hog hunting and the archaeological story, being in the jungle and police uh, searching for Maya ruins and so on.
And by the way, for listeners, JP does hold a doctorate of philosophy from Oxford. What school? What school is that? Is that from?
So it was Wilson College,
Okay.
University of Oxford, and studied social and cultural anthropology at Oxford.
And you also are the winner of the Proverse Prize 2019 for Epochal Reckonings, which is the most recent book of poetry that you wrote.
Correct, Epochal Reckonings, right. So that came out in 2020, won the Proverse Prize 2019, and I was very fortunate, again, to win that prize. And it's that book is interesting in the sense that cover a lot of controversial subjects in it. I don't. Did we talk about it before or not?
Yeah, I've got a copy, so I think we have done an episode with it, JP.
But anyway, the book talks about Katrina and
Yeah, right.
some of the school shootings and Trayvon Martin killing and Michael Brown killing.
Yeah.
And, you know, genocide of Amerindians. And also the immigration issues, the great immigration issues as far as immigrants and, you know, the genocide. Elsewhere as well. Yemen, Civil War.
Now, one of the topics of discussion that we've mentioned over the years is All Souls School, which I've brought up because I understand that Cecil Rhodes had left large portion of his trust and estate to All Souls School, but that is that JP, is that considered perhaps the most prestigious intellectual school there at Oxford? What is that school?
So All Souls is for professors only.
Uh-huh.
You are a full professor and you are or you're elected to be there as a full professor, or you take an exam to enter. And so it's a very exclusive club of international scholars, and I believe it was founded by Henry VIII.
Right. Okay.
And so it's an exclusive college in the sense that there's no student body, there's no undergraduates, it's not a graduate college. It's solely for professors and people that pass the exam to enter. And it is very exclusive and very obviously very intellectual. These are scholars that are world renowned.
And what is their main objective? Is it certainly simply a think tank of sorts, or
Kind of. I guess in a way, but it's a way for example, the professor of anthropology would be head of department would be one of the professors there. Mostly, it's for heads of department in universities at the university, and so I don't think that they collectively produce like think tank books or publications like a think tank would, but it is a dynamic where you would share your intellectual thinking with other scholars in diverse fields at high table dinner and so on, and it would be a place where you would be able to publish your whatever research you're working on in your field, because it's very exclusive academic atmosphere, I would say.
JP, let's as we wind down, I want to close out and revisit this Guatemalan study that you've done with the Mayans in South Florida. Talk a little bit more about that, and then I want to get your overall view nationally of just kind of where the country's at, and is it doing enough to we had such a tumultuous time in regards to race, in my view, under the previous administration, and I'm not sure what caused that, whether it was these lockdowns and frustration setting in on these different things. But where are we at today? But start with the integration with these Guatemalans in South Florida.
So basically, the research that I did there was with Alexander von Humboldt grant, shared with colleagues, and basically looking at memories of genocide and memories of racism against these populations living in South Florida. And, as another researcher said, how then does one conduct research on grief? If terror continues to pierce the grief, how does one enter that desperate place and then interpret what respondents are saying? What methodology does one employ? In many Guatemalan villages, diverse, often contradictory memories coexist concerning relations with the insurgent forces, what dynamics shape and reshape these multiple narratives. Over time, memories of the same events sometimes evolve into mirror images of each other when viewed from the recollections of those inside and outside the country. In other words, like how do you research genocide, and especially these memories of genocide, of grief and horror and absolute terror? So I had to get through that with my own research among them. And what not only did I research memories of genocidal trauma from the informants that I had, but also racial trauma in the sense that of the racism that is experienced by some of these by the Guatemala Maya population living in South Florida. And as I explained in my previous article, Mayan Cognition, Memory, and Trauma, I basically analyzed different forms of memory trauma, what are called episodes or schema of structural violence, which is a type of everyday quality of violence of racism against these populations. And what I looked at were types of memory. So what I called explained such as synchronic trauma and diachronic trauma. In other words, that people have specific episodes of trauma, which is synchronic, and have prominent that in relation to these populations is what I looked at as far as the Guatemala Mayan immigrants are concerned. Trauma as it relates to time through episodic and semantic memories, and how a cognition of time is possible, exposing a certain knowledge about it. And in this instance, racism, relation to racism. So understanding relationships of time associated with memory forms, and so on.
So let me throw this in here, JP, and it's again it's jumbling things a little bit, but again it kind of comes back to why I do the work that I do, and probably in some way why you join my program, and you've been one of the early guests that I've had, and certainly the one of the one of the uh, one of the mainstays on the show throughout the years. But the principle as to why I began doing this work was to expose the small voice that wasn't being heard. Um, and now it seems, JP, with the turmoil again, of getting away from these kind of racial topics or genocidal topics that that you started on here with these Guatemalans, and we can kind of revisit that. But I'm painting with a broader stroke here. Just in the past few days now, uh, the current administration has announced the formation of something called a disinformation governance board. And again, this doesn't have to do with race and integration of people's differences, or it may somehow. And of course, some people are calling this something by the name of Ministry of Truth, uh, ran by somebody named Nina Jankowicz. What are your thoughts here? And we'll get back to this race element if you like, but what are your thoughts on this, JP? As I wanted to kind of get your view of what's happening uh, nationally, and we can throw in, can throw in the turmoil there at that Twitter. I call it turmoil because it's kind of like from a policy standpoint, it seems like that corporation has taken a 180 pivot under Elon Musk. But then has this been a counterattack to the formation of the Disinformation Governance Board? Um, is that where we're at right now with the integration of the internet into so many aspects of our life that it is difficult to figure out what truth is? And so, does this country now need a Disinformation Governance Board? Why is it under the Department of Homeland Security? Is that necessary? Anyway, what are your thoughts on that, JP, if you would?
So, so the government creating an agency, Ministry of Truth. This is what you're talking about? Committee of Public Information.
Yeah, it's called the Disinformation Governance Board, and some people are calling it a Ministry of Truth. Um, but it's an umbrella under the Homeland Security. I don't know exactly what their role is, but it is. Have you not heard about this?
I'm just looking at it now. I've not really read up on it, to be honest, Ian.
Yeah.
But it sounds controversial. I mean, it says it simply wants to battle misinformation.
Right.
And I don't know. I mean, my thoughts are that if, we have Twitter being taken over by a billionaire. There was just a Washington Post article, today that I just saw that you have a billionaire who's the head of the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos, right? And you have Facebook, another billionaire, and you have, and so what's the dynamic happening there? I mean, what truth are we getting in the, as far as, Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, Elon Musk taking over Twitter, and Jeff Bezos of the Washington Post. Like, so we have billionaires dominating the public square, and so what is the legacy for that for social media networks, but also of our public information? And so when you just talked about this Ministry of Truth, or this disinformation governance board, I don't know much about it, to be honest, but I'd like to read more about it. But I think that I think that your platform helps to at least not subvert, but like to create a wider, broader audience for understanding news and what's happening in the world, rather than just being filtered through large corporations, right?
Yeah.
And that's really important because we're being bombarded by what's called manufactured consent, which is what Noam Chomsky called the manufacturing of consent through a corporate lens. And we're not necessarily always getting the truth from the dynamic of what's happening on the ground, and you have to really search for the truth to understand those dynamics.
Sure. Yeah. And what's the actual consent, and who's consenting?
Who's consenting? What's the actual consent? Who's the players that want the information to be filtered in such a way as you're getting filtered information?
So let's revisit the racism issue. How do you see that landscape nationally as a result of what the country's seen the past 2 years? Do you think that the country is becoming more uh, acceptable, or accepting rather, of race, or is the country going in another direction? How do you see things?
I don't know. I mean, if you look at what DeSantis is doing, our governor in Florida, certainly he's thinking like that. He's thinking that the critical race theory is a problem in schools, and that we're being taught, that students are being taught critical race theories through mathematics books, which I find kind of hard to believe. But I don't think that the Biden administration's changed much as far as immigration policy from Trump to now, and families are still getting separated at the border, and so that dynamic is still happening, unfortunately. And even though Biden says, well, they're doing a better job, I don't see them doing a better job when these Haitian immigrants were getting horsewhipped at the border by Border Patrol guards. I don't know if you remember that image.
Yeah.
About 6 months ago or a year ago, I'm not sure how long ago it was. But certainly the immigration policy has not ameliorated under Biden, right? That you don't have a immigration legislation being passed through. Well, so this is an election year, midterm election year, so that immigration package is probably not going to get passed. You don't have a sweeping general legislative package like you had under the Reagan administration, for example, right? When Reagan passed immigration policy, which allowed for a certain cap on immigrants coming from Central America. But just at that time, we also were fighting our proxy wars in places like Guatemala and El Salvador and Nicaragua, and so on, right? So the question is when will the immigration policy change? And it's still going to be featured in a big way in this next coming election cycle, immigration. And as far as like, are we getting better post Floyd death?
Yeah.
As far as racism is concerned in this country, I don't think we live in a post-racial society. People were saying that under Obama that we live in a post-racial, but obviously that wasn't true, right? So we don't live in a post-racial society. We live in a very divided society. As you had previous guests on that I helped invite, which was Brian Knowles, he's the head of the school boards, African American studies, right? He's works for the school district as an educator, and he is the manager of the Office of African American, Latino, Holocaust, and Gender Studies. He was on and talking about that, and I think he would argue as well that we're definitely not in a post-racial society. I think that Floyd's death showed that as well, that we still have a lot of work to do, but we're always going to have work to do as a country. We're not that far removed from the ending of Jim Crow, and we're not that far removed from the civil rights movements that passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. We're not that far removed of that, and I think we're still going through growing pains as far as how do we become better. I mean, if Toni Morrison's books are being banned, Ian, she won the Nobel Prize for Literature, what does that say about us, you know? I mean, Toni Morrison's book, Beloved, is being banned in some school districts, which is about slavery.
It's about slavery. Transatlantic slavery?
Slavery here in the United States.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with this book, JP.
Toni Morrison's book, Beloved.
Yeah.
It was a 1987 novel set in the American Civil War.
Oh.
Tells the story of a family of formerly enslaved people and so on. And it won the Pulitzer Prize. And she went on to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. And
it's a story of a family overcoming the dynamics of slavery, or what's the basic? It's an uplifting story.
It's I mean, it's tragedy, you know.
Yeah.
The dynamics of overcoming the effects of slavery, because of the suffering under slavery.
Wow. And this is being banned in some school districts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's where we're at. You know, it's
insane.
That's where we're at.
It's insanity to me, JP.
So I don't know what to say as far as like. I want to say we're in a better place, but when we're doing that kind of thing, banning books like Beloved.
I don't think any book should be banned, right? I mean, that's somebody's research. It should be published. It's up to the consumer to read it and buy it. That's their choice. That's how I feel.
Right.
Of course.
Here's articles why Toni Morrison's books are so often targets of book bans. I don't think it protects kids. I think it sanitizes racism in a sense. You know, I don't know why that book would be banned. I mean, yeah, that's where we're at. I don't know what to say. I mean, it's just like, I don't get it. I don't get it.
There's a past guest of mine, JP. His name is Estulin, Daniel Estulin. I think he's Russian born. And last I spoke to him, he was living in Spain, and he dissected the Bilderberg meetings. The kind of high level economic talks that feed into seemingly the World Economic Forum or something of that nature. So the Bilderberg meetings held at the hotel named the Bilderberg. I don't know too much about it, but Daniel had written a book that sold. I don't know if you know this story or not, JP, but he sold millions of copies of his book throughout Europe and South America, and then England had banned him. England had banned the sale of his book, and no major publisher in the U.S. would pick it up. So he found this small publishing house, uh, and 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 that was kind of one of the first examples that I had been privy to of a guy that's kind of done his own research. And JP, it's similar to this guy Sutton. I think I've mentioned his name to you before. Anthony Sutton, that was a Hoover Fellow at Stanford, and then Stanford was kind of censoring him. Well, not kind of. I mean, they were telling him not to not to write about this research that he'd been hired to write about and research about. It was contradictory to whoever was overseeing his work, and so he ended up walking away from Stanford and publishing on his own, and then founding a smaller publishing house. But yeah, that's what I'm reminded of is how a country, especially JP, two countries that you and I know personally, you having lived there for quite a while, I lived there for a little bit, and my mother being English, and I have family there. But here you have basically two considerably known beacons, if you will, of freedom, right? I mean, the United States being a product of this kind of Protestant movement from Europe via England, if in that sense, historically 1630s, I think it was. But here is the United States and England, which I typically pull back and I say, well, these two countries over the past recent couple centuries have done maybe arguably the most for well, certainly the United States in my view, but the most for free speech in that sense, and certainly that being the one of the cornerstones of our constitutional rights, free speech, free press. And here now books are being banned because
it
of
undermines democracy. I think it undermines our democracy when you start banning and censoring books. That's what the Nazis did. They burned books, right? I mean,
yeah, yeah.
What is that? I mean, what does it say about our democracy when you start banning? What's the freedom of thought? Where's the freedom of thought?
Right.
Especially when you have a book that tries to take you back to a time of slavery, of that dynamic of that disempowerment and that dynamic of racism to the extreme, right?
Yeah.
You ban that book for what? So kids aren't exposed to slavery? I mean, what is that? Doesn't make sense. I mean, to me, it just goes to say that we don't. We need to have better laws in the books that disallow that type of thing happening.
Yeah.
But it's school boards. You have the parents controlling school boards, and it's not teachers that are banning books necessarily, but
well, JP, thanks for joining the program. Ladies and gentlemen, JP Linstroth. JP, some final words and some final thoughts to leave listeners, and of course, direct them to any of your social media websites, whatever you like.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Thanks again for inviting me on. I always appreciate being on your show. Um, I guess one of the things that I didn't talk about was the lessons of empathy, love, and peace from the Buddhists.
Yep.
And Buddhism, in the Buddhist studies that I studied on the narratives from Tibetan Buddha monks, and also there's a American Buddhist nun who's also African American, happened to be, and her name is Sister Peace. And I guess how do we get to a place of, we talked about racism and you talked about where we are as a country and you talked about those types of things, like how do we get to a better place? Like what does that mean? How do we get to a better dynamic amongst ourselves? And according to one Buddhist monk, one can't change the world all at once. You do so one person at a time, right? And he emphasized that why is there much conflict in the world? It's because of lack of communication, right? While for another Buddhist monk, peace follows ethics and morality. According to him, there are 6 virtues for peace: generosity, ethics, patience, effort, concentration, and wisdom. But for another Buddhist monk, the peace begins with the individual, and from there, he or she may influence the collective. So I guess my thoughts are, how do we learn to be in a better place? And my thoughts on that are that we need to understand the notion of interbeing, that we are. I am, therefore you are, therefore I am. This notion of interbeing, right? We have to understand that we're all interrelated as beings on the planet to be at a better place and to overcome things like racism. And that's what I would say as far as ending.
Very well said. Very well said. And where can listeners go to find more about you?
So Amazon.com, I have my books on there. They're J.P. Linstroth, and also CounterPunch. Published several articles there on different topics that we talked about today. And so that really, again, it's really a privilege to be on your show, Ian.
Very nice of you, JP, and looking forward to next time, ladies and gentlemen. JP Linstroth.
Thank you so much.
So JP he's been joining Discusses Your Truth for well over 3 years, and he came my way via recommendation. I'd have to look back and see when the first time he joined. May have been within the first year, maybe over 4 years now. Folks, going on 5.5 years of doing this program, and the dialogue has an effect. It just simply does. This is where I want to reinforce what JP was talking about in regards to trying to burn books or cover up any history. I'll put that in. He didn't say that, but burning books, trying to do that to any productive civilization is a counterproductive. One must study and learn from history, whether it's ugly and grueling and difficult to read and understand. One must learn it to avoid repeating it. And so be it that slavery was an aspect of one civilization's history. I write about this in my book, and I quote JP in my book. I quote him, and right now it's with publisher. So hopefully this is now, after 2.5 years, it's going to press here quickly we'll see. Get this circulating, but I talk about where the slave system came from. Okay, this is not an American incepted form of economy. It's not. Okay, and you're probably thinking, well, yeah, Ian, yeah, of course it's not. It's the Chinese practice. Every great civilization seems to have practiced slavery, the cheapest form of uh, economic productivity, right? Sure, the Egyptians, right? Um, but we can say that. Sure, we can say that. But let's identify exactly where the American system came from, because that's Europe, right? It's not something that, for instance, Washington and Jefferson, or even those aboard the Mayflower, it's not something that these colonies said, "Oh, you know what? We're going to start enslaving these Africans." No, folks, this came in large part from an adapted form of being forced into paying debt to grow as a country, and that was through my research through the British East Indies Company. In large part, now not direct part, because there are different satellite companies that these Atlantic slave trading companies, which I don't know if they thread into the British East Indies Company or not. I'm just throwing that out there more as an example, because I haven't dug into it that much. Um, but my point here is that the slavery that was practiced in these early eras of this country that divided a North and a South. Again, economically, it was based off of an economic model inherited from Europe, and I get into that and I cite those things in the book. As I mentioned, JP is quoted, and I've got a number of great quotes in there from people, including Anthony Sabatini, who's a Florida congressman right now. Um, and I think I've even quoted Ron DeSantis, as a matter of fact. So the book is Freedom Reserve: No More Lies. It is available right now. It is available right now on pre-order. I just had somebody order 10 copies. Um, I've got to get, if you like a signed copy, you can do that. Just reach out to me personally. Once I get them printed, I can simply, if you purchase, I can sign it and send it off to you. So I'll get that link going on my website. But I don't hold anything back here. So it's not for the faint of heart, especially when you start breaking down the system for which the country was developed, which are Judeo-Christian organizational elements of system governance. Um, so it is not my intention to offend anyone in this book, because in God we trust, and that is, again, speaking of cornerstones of success of this Constitution: freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion, perhaps the most important and perhaps the keystone to the Constitution. That means giving peaceful right to anyone to practice peacefully their own interpretation of God, whatever God means for that person. That's success. That's the success, in my view, of the Constitution from that element. And certainly, burning books or censoring people is not. I mean, that is an all out battle. That's a war. That's a declaration. That's a declaration of war on people's freedom, in my view. So some heavy things there in the book coming out. It's currently with publisher, going through it right now as we speak, and should be going to print here very soon. Pre-ordered at Books a Million. It's listed at Amazon. I don't think it's available on Amazon at the moment, but there are a number of different outlets. As you simply type in Trottier, No More Lies, it'll come up. Indigo Books, Chapters. It is available internationally. So please get a copy. Please pre-order it right now. It should be coming your way very soon. And I thank JP for joining. Uh, Wherever you may be globally, certainly in the United States, cling on to that Constitution you've got and keep fighting for your freedoms, because regardless of your political stance, whether it's left, right, whether it's green, whatever it may be, your freedom is under attack, folks. Until next time, this is Ian Trottier for Discuss Your Truth. Be awesome.